So, dear friends, my topic today is the parsha we just read, which was parchat matot in Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 30. Now, I want to talk about a major motif in this week's parsha, which starts right at the beginning of the parasha. And Moses said to the heads of the tribes, the matot, which literally means the mateh is like a staff. I guess the head of the tribe had a staff of the Israelites, saying, this is the thing, or this is the word that God has spoken. A person who takes upon themselves a vow or takes an oath to prohibit something upon themselves, lo yachel devaro. Now, this is a difficult word. It's translated by Rashi, lo yachel devaro, from the word lechalel. He shall not profane his word. Whatever comes out of his mouth, that is what he shall do. The Chizkuni explains lo yachel dvaro from the word vayachal, which means to wait, vayachal ad bosh, meaning he should not let his word wait. What he promised, he must do. So this becomes a major motif, and I'll explain in a moment. And then it goes on to how vows can be annulled, etc., under certain circumstances. But if not, then a person has to keep it. Why? Now, the first question which is asked is, the rest of this parasha talks about the battle against Midian, and then again the story of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, who would like to live in Transjordan, request to stay there, request for Moses to stay there. So in a sense, this first part of the parsha seems to be a little bit out of place. And the commentators have a discussion about this. Some of the commentators say maybe it relates to what last week's parsha Pinchas was talking about, the offerings in the temple. And if a person wants to pledge an offering to the temple, what we call nidava, so you have neder and nidava, so they should carry out their promise and not wait on it and not profane themselves by not carrying out their promise. So that's one of the ideas that is suggested. But an idea by Chizkuni seems to me more simple and more harmonious with this parasha. And the Chizkuni, one of the commentators from the Middle Ages, says that basically parsha should be after the story of the war against Midian, because it's an introduction to the parsha, to the portion which talks about the 2.5 tribes. These 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, who had families and livestock, they asked Moses if they can stay on Transjordan before they cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, which becomes Israel. And Moses says to them, are your brethren going to go out to battle and you're going to stand here and live your lives as if nothing changed? So Moses says, if you're willing to join them in the battle for the land of Israel, then after that you can come back here, yes, and you can live here in the Transjordan area. And then Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, they agree. Now, if you make a comparison, the first parsha, which talks about vows and promises and annulling vows, it starts with Ze hadavar asher diber Hashem. This is the thing, or this is the word which God has said. And when Moses in chapter 32 talks to Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, he says, Im ta'asun et hadavar hazeh, if you shall do this thing. And davar actually comes from the word dibur, which is word, but it's the exact same thing. At the beginning, he says to the people, this is the word, this is the thing that God has said. And he says to Reuben, Gad, and Chatzi Manasseh, this is the thing, or this is the word that you have to do. If you're going to join your brothers in battle, And then when the battle is over, yes, you can come back here and be in Transjordan. But then in verse 23, Vim lo tasun can, and if you do not do so, because they already promised they would do it just before, if you do not keep your promise, if you don't do so, you should know that your sin is grave to God. And you should know that the sin is going to find you. So, in the meantime, build cities for your children and build also areas for your cattle and your land and your sheep. And hayotze mipichem ta'asu, what is coming out of your mouth, your promise, do it. So the introduction about vows and the severity of breaking a vow and a promise is an introduction, therefore, according to the Chizkuni, to what it says here about the story of the 2.5 tribes. Now, keeping a person's word is very important from the Torah's point of view. In life in general, when we meet somebody who we call them a man of their word or a person of their word, we're very impressed. They said something, they did it, because we're so used to the fact that people say things and it becomes meaningless. And even worse than meaningless speech is when they promise something and they do the opposite, because they just want to fool you, or misinformation, disinformation, or to make you think, yes, of course, and then they never do it. So in life, we're used to that. And people use trickery also. When they say, if somebody believes what you say, oh, they're just naive. To be a person of your word is to be a quality person. And it's becoming, unfortunately, much, much more rare. People don't take their words seriously. The Torah says when you give somebody your word, you have to follow it. And in the Torah, if you actually made a promise, even if it's to a self-imposing restriction, what we call a neder, this is something which you have to have a reason why you can't do it. And if you have a reason, you go before a chacham, a scholar, or a beit din of 3, and they have to null it for you. You have to take it very seriously. Remember Yom Kippur, the major fast day of atonement, the Day of Atonement. We begin the Yom Kippur service with ceremony, you might say. It's sort of part of the tefillah, but it's really a ceremony. It's called Kol Nidre. And Kol Nidre is about annulling the vows of the community. These self-imposed restrictions that we might have either on purpose or inadvertently taken upon ourselves. And it takes Yom Kippur to annul them, or a beit din, because you have to take your speech very seriously. Because what you say is who you are. What you think is who you are. What you say is who you are to others. And therefore, you have to take it very seriously. Now, there's a direct connection between this idea and the Haftorah, because the Haftorah, what we read from the prophets, is usually connected to some major motif in the parasha. Now, interestingly enough, this Haftarah, which is taken from Jeremiah chapter 1, Yirmiyahu chapter 1, is considered one of the 3 Haftarot before Tisha B'Av during the 3 weeks, which relate to the pending destruction of Jerusalem, which happened on the 9th of Av. And so we read Jeremiah chapter 1 because the book of Yirmiyahu is talking about the destruction of the first temple. And even in chapter 1, he says, from the north, there is going to be evil, which will be approaching. But on the other hand, there are other chapters in Jeremiah which could have been just as appropriate. It's true, next week we're going to read Jeremiah 2, but there are other chapters too. But there's something about this chapter which ties directly to this week's parasha. First of all, when God says, Jeremiah, that I already, when you were in your mother's womb, I appointed you as a prophet. Jeremiah says, Lo yadati daber kinar anochi. I don't know how to speak. I'm just a young man. But it goes even further. God says to them, okay, what do you see, Yirmiyahu? Yirmiyahu says, oh, I can see a vision of an almond branch. In Hebrew, makel shaked. Shaked is an almond. God says, hey, taf telirot, you saw very well. Ki shoked ani al dvari la'asoto. It's a play on words. Shoked is an almond. Shoked means to be determined. And God says, I am determined to carry out what I say. Shoked ani al dvari la'asoto. I am determined that what I say I'm going to do. That ties in directly with the parsha, because the parsha says, what you say, you have to do when you take a vow. And Moses says to Reuben, Gad, and half of Menashe, your promise you must fulfill. So this motif of taking your promises seriously, your promises to your children, your promises to your spouse, your promises to yourself of things that you want to change for the good, your promises to your employees who might be looking up to you, your promise possibly to the boss who's expecting for something from you, your promises to friends. Okay, sometimes we promise a little bit more than we can do, but we can also excuse ourselves and ask for forgiveness, because sometimes people get hurt from these things. And your word should be something which you take seriously, almost sanctified in that sense. Shalom, shalom.